Well, welcome everybody. I hope this is all coming through just fine. Welcome to the Fall Season Strategies and Tactics to Grow Your PHC Business. Take a few moments here just to introduce myself. My name is Tom Carman. I'm the Director of Arborist Development at Rainbow Tree Care. I started in the tree care industry back in 1988 while I was still a student in college. I got involved with the Dutch elm disease management program that Rainbow had. It was kind of where we started our plant health care. And from that point, I moved into working as a plant health care technician, besides just doing the elm injections. Then moved into our offices, worked as a scheduler, kind of organizing all the jobs. Then our operations manager, dealing with all the different aspects of our production. Worked as a consulting arborist for almost 15 years, and after that point moved into our sales manager position. For us, we call that the Director of Arborist Developments. So I work with all of our consulting arborists to train them in not just the science of the treatments that we do, but also the conversations that we have with customers and how those can be used to help enroll people and educate them so that they choose to do the services that we offer. I am a board certified master arborist, have been for close to 10 years, I believe, and am one of the employee owners of Rainbow Tree Care. So we are an ESOP company, an employee stock ownership plan, and so all of our employees over time develop an ownership stake in the business. Sorry, I'm having one. There we go. We're having trouble there a little bit with the first slide moving through, so that gives you a little bit of the background stuff with me. The little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is worth 1 CEU. If you didn't enter your ISA certification number during the registration, go ahead and enter that now into the questions box. Go ahead and put in your ISA number. That way we'll be able to get you your CEU for attending today's webinar. Also, if you have any questions, go ahead and enter them in the questions box, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. We'll get those all put together and be able to offer that question up for everybody else to hear, and then answer that as best I can. And then also just a note that we're recording the webinar, and so it will be available afterwards if it's something you want to renew or review. Any of the notes or things that you got from it, that's an option as well. Well, let's talk a little bit about the intended outcomes for today. Really, there's 3 areas we really want to focus on. The first is want to make sure that all of you understand the value of late season PHC recommendations. You know, I'm sure it is something that all of you are thinking about. That's why you're here, and it's also something that you'd like to have more of, but I'm not sure that always everybody understands what the real value is of those. Want to talk about how you can pick 2 to 3 services to focus your PHC efforts on, and how you can develop a marketing plan that will allow you to increase your sales and profitability in those areas. And then finally, talk a little bit about how leveraging pruning calls to gain plant health care opportunities can be done. That's an area we've always struggled with, is how do you get people to call about plant health care when they think that everything is going fine on their property, and they're not arborists, they're not going to be able to necessarily diagnose what might be wrong. So one of the ways that we're able to sell more plant health care and late season services is to solicit them for things that they can understand, and one of those areas is clearly pruning. When people have trees that are too close to their house, they're hitting their head on branches when they're mowing, when they've seen problems with storm damage in their neighborhood, is an area that we can go ahead and market to, and then when they call us about those things, we have an opportunity to talk about other services. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we move along. Well, really, when we think about plant health care, the tree health care seasons that we have, we kind of break those up into 5 seasons. Now, there's more than 4. You know, you think of the normal spring, summer, fall, winter. You know, springtime, usually, I'm guessing most of you are very busy. We are. We get a lot of phone calls coming in. As we get into the early summer, those phone calls start to slow down a little bit, and they do taper off. As we get into the late summer, that's an area where generally we do see a marked slowdown, typically. Most of the early season insect disease issues have been addressed if people had concerns about them. For people that didn't see any of those things, though, those are really all out there waiting for us to identify for them. And so as the summer progresses, the opportunities are still there. It's just that you're not going to tend to have people call out of the blue and ask you for information about those. And then as we enter into the fall season, for us here in the Twin Cities, we get a cold winter with snow, and so we do a lot of dormant season pruning. We do have oak wilt here in the Midwest, and so a lot of trees are trees that have to be pruned during the dormant season. Things like oaks, we recommend pruning elms, birch trees, things like that. So then as we move into the fall, that's a great time for us to deliver a lot of those services. And we'll talk about why that's such a good time, both from a standpoint of delivery and from sales. And with the winter, we don't have a lot of PHC active selling going on. But what we are doing is doing a lot of review of our customer files and getting ourselves set so that we can send those out in the spring and have a real big push. One of the things that has made us very successful with our PHC services is that we're able to get about 40% of our annual PHC sales through our spring renewal letters. And so when you get that kind of jump to start out the season, it can make a huge difference for you on both the efficiency with which you can get work scheduled and the total amount of revenues you're going to be able to bring in for the season. Well, if you look at what kinds of services you can offer in the late summer and fall, we kind of break it into three areas. There are things where you've got trees that are showing symptoms. You've got things that we can do as preventive treatments that are really kind of for next year, but things that we can do now. And the other is to look at things that we can sell for next spring. Oftentimes one of the words that we use around here is a too late treatment, meaning it's too late to treat this year, but there is something we could do as a service for somebody for the following season. So when we talk about trees showing symptoms, one of the things you want to look for in your areas is what are the 2 to 3 most common trees in the area for you. For us, we have in the Midwest here, the most common trees are things like green ash, crabapple. We have a lot of Colorado blue spruce, a lot of birch trees, you know, things like that. And so if we look at what those trees are, and then we look at what are the 2 to 3 most common symptoms associated with those trees, you can kind of start to narrow down where you've probably got the best opportunity for things that you can put a program together, things that you can focus on for PHC for the late season. For us, the areas that we really focus on typically are things like chlorosis, apple scab. Almost everybody here has a crabapple tree in their yard, and most of them end up showing apple scab. Emerald ash borer, and Japanese beetle, which has been an increasing problem here over the last 6-7 years. It just keeps going up in total amounts of trees that are being attacked. So once you've kind of looked at what some of those things are, what you can do is go out to your customers' properties, kind of take it out to the property. So when you're on your customers' properties, you'll be able to kind of identify trees that have the symptoms you've decided to focus your treatment efforts on, and then look at what kind of protocols you have that you can propose and what those things are that you can do. So one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, can your salespeople identify what these things are? And that's something that you're going to have to spend some time on. So if you've focused on and decided that chlorosis is one of the things that you want to focus on, you've got to be sure that all of the people out there that are doing selling for you can identify what chlorosis is. More importantly, not only can they identify it, but they understand your protocols. How do you do treatments for chlorosis? Are you doing trunk injections? Are you doing soil amendments? Are you doing manganese tablet applications? Are you doing foliar sprays? Are you going to do a service we do called root enhancement, which is using an air spade to loosen up the soil, add organic matter, and improve the overall growing medium? Are you going to use plant growth regulators such as Cambistat, which can also increase the chlorophyll production in the tree? Those are all things that you've got to make sure that your people understand. Another area is that your people that are doing the work out there for you, are they very confident in being able to identify what that problem is and at least understand that you have treatments for it? They may not need to know all the details about it, but some of these things are things that can be pretty easy to identify. So chlorosis, it's just a fancy word for talking about yellowing in trees, and the iron and manganese deficiencies that can cause that. Why is that a problem for the tree, other than just being an off color? Well, it's a big problem because the tree doesn't manufacture energy and therefore becomes weaker and can decline and ultimately die. So this is a great way for you, if you've got all of your employees trained in identifying these areas that you've decided to target, you'll continue to find more and more opportunities for those out in the field. So I can't stress enough how important it is to do that training. So we talked a little bit about pruning as a gateway. Well, the pruning is the #1 reason we get phone calls. Most of the calls we get, people call in and they're concerned that their tree needs a haircut, or that they've got concerns that it's hitting their car when it pulls into the driveway, so it's too low. Or recently, in the last few days here, we had some big thunderstorms roll through the Twin Cities and the area north of here. A lot of the areas where people have their summer cabins and lake cabins were hit by high winds. We've had a fair amount of rain. There were a lot of trees that toppled over, a lot of trees that broke, fell onto cabins, caused a lot of disruption. So that's really ever-present in minds, and we started to see kind of a spike in calls that we're getting because of those issues. So when you get out onto the property, you can go ahead and look at their trees from a pruning standpoint, but also one of the kind of the magic questions that we like to talk about is, while I'm here, would you like me to mention if I see something that might need attention? And it's rare for somebody to say, no, I'm not interested at all. And so it is a great opportunity to walk around the property. Not only do you see sometimes things that they call about for pruning, but you notice and point out other things like, hey, do you mind having that tree so low? Are you having problems mowing the lawn? Is that branch hitting your house? One of the concerns you could have is if those branches are rubbing against the roof, they may damage shingles. And not only is that a problem for the roof, but the more expensive issue is if it causes water damage. And so by bringing those things up, you get an opportunity to have them see that you're really looking at their property and looking out for their well-being. One of the things when we think about it is we do a lot of plant growth regulators using Cambistat for tree health, particularly with oak trees, which are a very valued tree that generally lives to a great old age here in the Twin Cities. And I've never once had a customer call in asking for plant growth regulators. And so the reason we sell most of what we sell is because of the fact that we bring that conversation up with people when we're out on site, or we market to all the people that have that kind of tree, and then we don't waste our efforts, sending out information and having conversations about people who might not be interested in that service. So one of the things you'll hear our arborists here talk about consistently is understanding the key distinctions. And what you'll find is that the greatest barrier to having those additional services offered from our salespeople is if they don't feel like they're confident themselves in understanding what that disease is and how do I explain that to a customer. We talked a little bit about what was it? With Cambistat, people won't ask for that service, or with chlorosis. Some people are like, well, so my tree is a little bit more yellow, why do I care about that? Well, we need to be able to educate them and explain to them why they should care about that, because it will lead to decline in the tree. Right now, emerald ash borer is in its about 6th or 7th year here in the Twin Cities since being identified, and it's something that a lot of people still don't understand, that realistically they only have a couple of options. They can either protect a tree or they can ultimately remove the tree. It's just a matter of when they're going to end up doing the removal. And so our being able to have those conversations with the customers in a confident manner where we can answer their any concerns they might have, find out if it's a service that they would even value, because in some cases, an ash tree, you might find out that they really don't like the tree. They're thinking about wanting to do an addition on the house. It's a great opportunity to talk about why they might want to have that tree any longer. The other thing is that you've got to make sure that all of your people can identify the trees that you have in question. One of the things, I was out actually yesterday at a new client's property that had used a competitor for a number of years, and they were concerned about the quality of that person's ability to make decisions and recommendations. And one of the big concerns was the fact that they've been protecting a bitternut hickory for the last 7 years against emerald ash borer. So they've been doing soil applied treatments and then trunk injections to prevent that. Years ago, we actually lost a golf course customer we had that did Dutch elm disease protection because they wanted to choose somebody cheaper. And we got a phone call back from them a few weeks later asking us to, would we be willing to come out and re-establish the account with them, which of course we were. And when I asked the reason, the company that came out to do the maple and a basswood, also called an American linden, and we're injecting those trees, to which I replied that we offered a lifetime guarantee against Dutch elm disease on any of those trees that we treat. So, really being clear about what those trees are, especially those ones that you're targeting your PHC services on, will make a big difference for people. So some of the things that are showing symptoms that we can treat in the late summer and fall are things that, depending on the area of the country, sycamore anthracnose. That's a tree that here in the Twin Cities, not a lot of sycamore trees, but the ones that we do have, they do show that problem later in the season. In our database of more than 80,000 customers, we only have 45 people that have a sycamore tree. So while that's a good, easy one to identify, it wouldn't fall into the category of those 2 or 3 that we want to market for probably if we wanted to increase our revenues. Just not enough of a market for it. Chlorosis, on the other hand, is something that we see a lot of here in the Twin Cities. Things like pin oak, white oaks, river birch, and red maple are trees that show a lot of chlorosis in this area. We tend to have a high alkaline soil, and with that higher pH, it does tend to bind up the iron and manganese in the soils. And so even if there is enough of that material, sometimes the availability to the tree is not there. And so by targeting that area last year, we more than doubled by sending out information to only our customers that we knew had those kinds of trees. We not only saved ourselves a lot of money on the marketing effort, but we also more than doubled our numbers of treatments that we did for injections using Verdure for treating iron and manganese chlorosis. Another area that you can look at is trees that are in kind of mild to chronic tree decline. That's something that tends to show up as the summer progresses. A lot of those have to do with stem girdling roots, which can be a real problem from trees being planted too deeply. It's a problem that we tend to see here in the Midwest, primarily on linden trees and all the different varieties of maples. While it can happen to almost any tree, those are the ones we see it the most on. Japanese beetle damage. Up until about 7 years ago, here in the Midwest at least, that was something that we'd see them occasionally, but it never was a real problem. But after that point, for some reason, and it could be due to climate change, warmer weather patterns, but the Japanese beetles have been steadily increasing their populations to the point where they completely skeletonize the leaves on some of the trees, particularly for us with crabapple, lindens, and birch trees. Borer damage. Borers are going to be prevalent all over the country. For us, we have all of the three big borers that we deal with are emerald ash borer, which is newer. Before that, we had been dealing quite a bit with bronze birch borer and two-line chestnut borer. We have a lot of scale insects that we have problems with. One of the newer ones that we're seeing the populations build up on is magnolia scale. Here, crab apples have long been the primary small ornamental tree for people, but in the last decade, as we've seen more and more people planting small magnolia trees, and for those of you who might be in parts of the country that have the big real magnolias, these are trees that for us tend to stay around 15 feet in size and smaller. So, but when they get the scale insects on there, it's very noticeable to people because of the sooty mold produced. It attracts a lot of wasps, and is something that people really want to deal with. Cool season mites, as you get to the late summer and into the fall, cool season mites can be a real problem, particularly on most of our evergreen trees, a lot of our spruce, arborvitae, or white cedars. And then finally, as it progresses, it's typically something that causes, damage to the leaves and curling, and these are things that people can notice that there's something not quite normal looking about their plants. So what you really want to look at is, what are all those kinds of things that as you're out there, you're going to see these things that you can identify and bring up to people. Preventive treatments. So many of these invasive pests, they can be treated in the fall to prevent attacks the following year. Some of these treatments in the fall, the real advantage for us is that we're able to bring in revenue during that late season, but also if you talk to your people who run your production, the springtime is an incredibly busy time, not just for you as a salesperson or an arborist, but for your production trying to get all the work done. And some of the treatments that we do, like apple scab, for instance, has a fairly narrow window. If you don't get that first application on in a timely manner and the apple scab infection occurs, it becomes too late. You can't really get the quality of control that you want to have your customers. So some of these treatments that we're talking about that you can do in the late season, they could have been done in the following spring too and probably still been effective. But by doing them the previous fall with those applications, you avoid having to get them done in the spring. So it helps you spread out a little bit more your production workload and make sure that those clients are taken care of. Here in the Midwest, we get a narrower window. So if we get a late spring, I know a lot of people in the Northeast this last year had just record snows. I know the springs were very late for a lot of you getting started with your plant health care. You might have run into a problem if you tried to wait and do all those applications in the spring. So great opportunity to get those done the previous year. Some of those preventive treatments that we're talking about would be things like plant bugs. Here in the Midwest, we get plant bugs primarily on things like honey locust, ash trees. They become less important as we've had emerald ash borer, which can kill the tree, but they're still something that can be a nuisance for people. White pine weevil, aphids, a lot of the soft scales that you can apply materials that will be persistent and available the following year. Leaf miners, both on elms, birch, a lot of other leaf miners that may be in your parts of the country. Emerald ash borer, you can do those treatments in the late season with soil applied materials. Winter moth, spring caterpillars, and then of course the other borers, bronze birch borer and two-line chestnut borer, which we do. We really focus on doing those as late season applications, after August 1st and before the end of September. By doing a lot of those applications during that time frame, we've been able to kind of spread out again, our production workload, and it's been very successful for us. Then there's the last area, the selling for spring treatments, and these are things that are going to show those symptoms in the late summer, fall. but stuff that you can't necessarily do treatments for right now. And a lot of these things are going to be the foliar fungi that you find, and we'll talk about those in a second, and also what I would call dependable insects, insects that you tend to see almost every year. So some of these things that we consider the too lates are things like apple scab. Again, very common here in the Midwest. Almost everybody has those trees. Anthracnose. Anthracnose is kind of almost a generic fungus. There's typically, you put the name of a plant in front of anthracnose, and then you've identified what it is. You've got ash anthracnose and oak anthracnose, and you can get anthracnose on dogwoods, and virtually any kind of plant will have a variety of anthracnose, it seems like. Powdery mildew, which is what's showing the picture here, very common for us on a variety of plants. We see it a lot on lilacs. We see it on alpine currant hedges, alpine currants in general, those kinds of plants. Bacterial leaf scorch, that's one that will show up in the later season. We don't have any confirmed cases of that here in Minnesota, but in some parts of the country that would be a big issue. Gypsy moth, bagworm, another one's not really here in the Midwest with bagworm, but I know for some parts of the country it's a big problem. Pine wilt disease, and then a couple of ones that we do see a lot of here in the Midwest, Diplodia, which is also the same as Phoropsis, needle blight. That one I think has switched back and forth between Diplodia and Phoropsis numerous times here in the last 15 years. The scientists that are responsible for naming those and classifying them keep changing it back and forth between those two names. And then finally, Rhizosphaera needlecast. That's a really big problem here in the Midwest with the really warm, humid summers that we have. We do see a lot of infections that cause early needle drop on Colorado blue spruce trees. So with all those things you're looking at for next year's treatments, there's a whole host of ways that you can manage those. I had mentioned earlier that we see about 40% of our plant health care revenues come from those too lates that we send out as recommendations. And you can do something as simple as storing those in a paper file. As you're out on properties, writing down notes and just putting those all into a big loose leaf binder and keeping those all on file so that you can follow up on them later. Another thing that you can do, depending on what you have for capacity and functions for your sales process, is if you can go ahead and enter that in your database now for next year, that helps you avoid missing that recommendation to a customer. One of the things that always is amazing, I think, to a lot of our customers is when we look at something and we say, oh, you've got apple scab and I'll send you a recommendation next spring, I think about half the people initially just don't believe that they'll actually get something from you, because we get a lot of comments from people that compliment us for actually following up on what we said we would do. And if you have any capacity to be able to put that into your system so you can't accidentally forget it, it's sort of the further you get away from that site visit, the more likely it is that you might forget. So anything you can do to ensure that. And then finally, if you don't have a computer system and you're just having to work off of kind of paper, basically, you can use a basic spreadsheet like Microsoft Excel, and you can put in the information about the contact information for the customers. I've got a little bit of a sample of one here. If we were looking at and wanted to focus on with some of our customers, maybe emerald ash borer, apple scab, and chlorosis, just by putting in their names and addresses and their emails, and then marking off which of those issues they would want to maybe pursue with them, it does give me the capacity to do some mail merges, and we're not going to spend any time really going through how you would do mail merges. If you Google doing a mail merge using whatever software you have, probably Microsoft Office is the most common, you can find numerous copies of videos on YouTube or instructional directions on the internet that will walk you step by step through doing a mail merge. So don't feel like they're that intimidating. You can figure them out. One of the things we've sent out, we're using a service called Exacttarget. There are some other services. I know MailChimp we've used in the past. There's a lot of these things you can use, and they allow you to do a little bit more managed and structured mailings to customers via email in particular. So this is an example of one we recently sent out on Japanese beetles, and basically you can see the name of the client, Mary and Nick. That just is merged in there. All that other content is part of the standard piece, and then it goes ahead and it has a picture of their consulting arborist with their phone number and their email, and they even have a button there that they can schedule now. So if they're interested in just getting us to get something set up for them, they can click that button and that comes into our office, and we can go ahead and get it set up for them. One thing I will point out is you notice that this email that we sent out, it actually makes note of who their particular arborist is. And we've found that our open rates on this type of marketing is dramatically higher when it comes from their consulting arborist. So rather than coming directly from Rainbow Tree Care, it comes from Charles Castor at Rainbow Tree Care. And that relationship that you develop really increases the likelihood that people not only open this up, but also they don't feel like we're sending them stuff that's not of interest to them. So we always want to have stuff that can be of value to them and not feel like we're spamming them. So I talked about the different aspects of what you can do and identifying those things. So some of the real benefits with having a marketing plan that you can make real simple by having just 2 to 3 services to focus on. You can look at having it's simpler to schedule the applications. There's no question about that. If you talk to the people in your operations area that have to do all the production work, if you're able to do a few things only, not have so many varied services to offer, it's just a lot simpler for them to have the right products on trucks and instruct the technicians on what they're supposed to do and what they're applying to. That's easier. It's also incredibly more efficient, which also means it's more profitable. So if you're having to drive all over your area, your service area, to do single treatments for something that's fairly uncommon versus being able to do a treatment for a customer, then treat their neighbor's house, then go 5 houses down the block, and then 2 blocks over. The more you have those, the more time you're spending actually doing applications on properties and less time behind the windshield of one of your service trucks where they're not making money, they're not getting work done. And it also makes it easier for you to train your arborists and your staff. You know, it's very difficult to have everybody become an expert on everything. In fact, some would say that there's no such thing as an expert on everything. You know, you can be qualified on many things and maybe be an expert in only certain areas. So you may as well become the best trained you can on the areas that you're focusing your service efforts on. So one of the ways you can go after customers is by utilizing your current customer database. And I'm going to mention here that fall is not the best time to look for new customers. Now, it is an okay time to look for new customers, but not if you're looking to do late season PHC services for them. One of the reasons for that oftentimes is if you're marketing for late season PHC, as I mentioned before, you don't get as many calls as you would if you were marketing for pruning type work. And also the turnaround time from the time you might put out a marketing piece to when people might eventually call you, and then you get out there and finally look at it, oftentimes you reach that point where it may be a little too late in the season to deliver that service for them. So you want to really utilize your current customers. You'd be amazed at how many of those people are people that have these things that you've identified, these 2 to 3 services. One of the ways that's going to be really helpful, if you have an inventory of your customers' trees, And I know a lot of you probably don't have that, but I will tell you that for Rainbow, it's in one of the areas we've been able to really grow our getting and keeping inventories of our customers' trees. And that technology is becoming easier and easier using GIS information. There's a lot of different software options out there for collecting that information. For the last 15 years, we've been collecting it basically by hand drawing a diagram of the property, which helps our production area, and then entering into our system with an actual inventory. So if they have a dozen trees, we know what those dozen trees are, which helps them both for this marketing effort, be able to identify and target it to the right people, but also really helps your customers in that when they call in, they can correctly identify what the tree is that they're calling in with a question about. Otherwise, we get my pine is sick, and they might be talking about a fir or a spruce or a tamarack, something else. So, and then finally, the best reason for utilizing your current customer database is simply that these are people that have done business with you in the past. If you've done a good job for them, they're the people most likely to continue to buy services from you. So some of the ways that you can make some of these offers is look for opportunities to make it simple for people. So remember, simple message and send this out. So fixed pricing, and I'll provide an offer that already lets your customer know what the cost will be. A few years ago, we tried that with Japanese Beetle, had really good success. We, instead of having to send something out to people, then having one of our artists go out and visit them, identify that yes, indeed, they had Japanese Beetle, and then set up the applications, then get it scheduled, then get an applicator out there. We sent out information both through the mail and through emails that showed pictures of Japanese beetles. It's pretty easy for people to identify both the damage and seeing those giant-sized beetles on their plants. And so they could call in, and for a flat price, we were willing to come out and treat 4 Japanese beetles on their property. And then 2 weeks after that, within 2 weeks, our consultant would go out and follow up on all those sites and look for opportunities to maybe in the future do a soil-applied treatment for Japanese beetle rather than reacting to it, doing it before they had a lot of the damage of the following year. It also gave us an opportunity to look at things like tree fertilization, things we could do to improve the overall health of the plants, and also see all the other things that they had. So both a great customer service tool, the client sees you coming out and doing an evaluation. I'm out here to check and see that the Japanese beetle treatment was effective. But again, another opportunity to see other things that they don't even know that they might need as a service if they're concerned about their trees. Another area you can offer is loyalty discounts. So if people have been using you for other services in the spring, you can offer them a % off for doing certain kinds of services later in the season. If they did apple scab sprays or something in the spring, maybe you offer a discount for doing tree fertilization on those same trees. Another area would be add-on services. So if you've already got them scheduled to come out and do treatments on a couple of trees, if you can add on this additional tree at the same time, you can do that for a lower price. And we're always very upfront with customers that one of the areas that we're able to help them on is if they have more trees in one visit, we have kind of there's a travel charge basically. It's built into our services, but for us spraying trees, the first tree has one price. Every additional tree in that same property is a fraction of that cost. So the more trees you do at once, the less it is per tree. And people really can understand that. They really like to see the discounts too that can be applied because of those savings. So, your marketing push. Here we'll talk about just the practical parts of getting it done. So we kind of identified the what, deciding on 2 to 3 services to focus your efforts on. The who, we just got done talking about, if you can, filter your client list by tree species. You can target more efficiently. If not, you can market out to all of your customers It's just, like I said, if you're able to target for something like chlorosis and really focus on the people that have the trees that are likely to have that, you'll save yourselves a lot of money in the marketing costs. So really, we'll talk about now is the how. How are you going to reach your client base? And keep in mind that you're going to want to reach these people in more than one way, most likely. Once people get a piece in the mail, they might be busy. Their kid had a soccer game. They threw it on the desk and it got piled underneath stuff. So they may have glanced at it for a second, but then if you follow up with an email piece or leave a card when you're out there doing another service that talks about the same thing, the more ways you can get that in front of them, the more likely they are to be receptive to it at a time when they actually have the time to read about it and see that it's something they might need. So how can you do those things? Well, one of the ways is through an e-newsletter. And one of the great values of these things is they're really cheap. So you really have your time to put together the piece and put some photos in, get some text in the body talking about it. But really, you send this out to 5 people or 5,000 people, and really your cost is going to be about the same. So if this is an area you need help on, we do have content and photos you can use for making campaigns on this. This is something you can talk to your territory arborist about. We do have a marketing area here that will be happy to help you with kind of putting some of these things together. Another area is a direct mail postcard. And these are a great way to get a simple message out to your clients. So again, not everybody has an email. And so these are ones you can send out both to customers that you couldn't email basically the same message to, or it's a great way to look at going after new customers in areas. So we've done some analysis of different zip codes and what is our ideal client, and then we focus on sending these out into those zip codes for people that aren't customers yet. And the one downside to working with this type of marketing approach is direct mail postcards are by far the most expensive way to get that message out, because you've got the cost of both printing a color document, as a postcard, and then you've got the postage with it, and the success rate on it is fairly low. If you get 1 to 2%, you're doing pretty well with this kind of marketing. So you've got to be willing to send out to a lot of people to get good success with the revenues that you want to bring in. So again, if this is something that you need help with, we can go ahead and help you get your logos onto stuff. We have some things that are already ready to go to printers on some of these kinds of things, and it can be customized to really work with you and your company. Another area to use is your website, and this is something that you can make sure that you're updating. Any fall services or specials that you're going to be offering, you want to get that up there right on the front page of the landing page for your website. This is an area that I'm always amazed at when I look at other tree companies out there. Sometimes it looks like they haven't done any change to their website in like a year and a half. You look at it and it just seems outdated. So if you're going to have your website out there, it is an area that you want to make sure you put some attention onto. Put on new information, things that you guys are finding out there, your specials, the offers, any supporting information you want to have. So again, if it's an area that you need some help with, this is an area where your tree people, you're probably not going to be experts. You're likely going to be working with some outside people that can help you build and design web pages and help maintain them. We have some people here too that can, if you've got those kinds of people, or if they're on your own staff, we do have photos and stuff that you could use on your web page to help improve that. And then finally, probably one of the most effective ways you can possibly sell any kind of service is the face-to-face meeting. And anytime you're out there with a customer, regardless of what the issue they called you out for, you handle that issue. You always want to make sure you take care of what their stated need is. But you do have that opportunity then to bring up other options and solutions that you have for issues that they might not even know about. And we call them fact sheets, but these sell sheets, they can be customized with your logo and information, and they're things that you can hand out to a customer that tells them about chlorosis or rhizosphere needle cast. You know, rhizosphere is not a word that runs off of most people's tongues, and so we get a lot of customers who will call us up, and it's fun to hear how they mangle some of these disease names. But at least with the sheet, you know, they're only going to remember a lot of times about 10% of what you tell them immediately. So having that sheet in hand, especially if you're only meeting with one of the people on site and their spouse, their partner doesn't have the time to meet you, that way they have an opportunity to read through that information and understand why you're making that recommendation. Then finally, the kind of the how. Make sure that if you're going to send and do a marketing campaign for late season fall PHC stuff, that you've got a way to make sure that you can get back to all these people. Nothing's worse than, you know, having a campaign where you actually were successful. You got a lot of people to call, and then you didn't have any plan on how you were going to answer the phone and how you were going to get people out there to give them a proposal and follow up with those proposals. You know, with our salespeople, I always tell them we've invested probably 60 to 90 minutes with a lot of these customers between the phone call they made in, going out and driving to their property, looking at the trees there, having conversations with the customer. You know, you absolutely want to make sure that you're going to follow up on these things, because that's where you will get your big return. And a lot of customers, I'm amazed at some of them. You know, you follow up 2, 3, 4 times by email, and the 4th time, you know, they respond and say, "Thanks for staying with this for me. You know, I've been really busy. Now, yeah, go ahead, absolutely get this scheduled." And those don't take a lot of time, but it does have a big payoff for you. Well, that kind of concludes the information that I was going to present today. You'll go ahead, if you go onto our website, you'll see that we do have a whole bunch of upcoming webinars. There's 6 more as part of our late summer, fall webinars that we're going to be doing. You know, talking about vascular wilts and sycamore anthracnose, growth management tools for trees, using air tools like an air spade to improve soil and root health, soil management for trees, managing leaf chlorosis, and then finally late season insect management protocols for your tree care business. At this point, I'll just point out there's my email on the slide here for you. You can check our website for a lot of this information, or if you have questions, email info@treecarescience.com. Available by request. We do have our late summer and early fall opportunity sales guide that people will be able to utilize. It follows a lot of the things we talked about today. Also lists a lot of our products and the solutions for the problems, what product is used for what. We have protocols for all of those on what you would do for treatment, and that stuff you can incorporate into your training and to your sales conversations. Yeah, so the question, one of the questions came up, how did we address site variability, the number of trees, location of trees, size of trees, when determining the fixed pricing you discussed? It's a great question. We did put a little bit of a limitation on it. We said for up to half-acre properties, and we went ahead and then looked at it as an opportunity. Some of those, you know, were really good for us, and others, you know, we spent a little bit more time than maybe we wanted to, but the chemicals for doing Japanese beetle sprays were relatively cheap, and it was a great opportunity to respond to people. We were able to get out there by doing it this way. We could have somebody on their property by the end of the next business day and have sprayed their Japanese beetle problem. And when we're doing it our traditional way, you know, it could be several days before they get the appointment, and then a couple more days until the production gets done. So, you know, we were able to, again, not look at it as just treating the Japanese beetle, but most of those Japanese beetle treatments led to additional plant health care and pruning sales. So, you know, it wasn't really a loss leader per se, but there were a few properties where we would have charged more if we had seen the property in advance. Any other questions? Got a few minutes left here. If anyone has any other further questions or comments on any of the stuff that we talked about. Another question, how would I recommend getting started spraying trees if someone doesn't yet have a big expensive spray rig? Well, some of the ways we've done it is we do have some of the larger spray rigs, but we've been moving more and more to getting spray equipment set up on kind of a skid system, and so it's something that can be lifted on and off of trucks, so you can utilize your trucks for some different uses, and it really doesn't require a really big expensive spray rig to be able to spray a lot of smaller trees. And one of the areas we've been kind of moving towards for the last 15 years is we're doing less and less sprays on big trees and really looking for opportunities to use systemic soil supply treatments for treating a lot of those bigger trees. For instance, with 2-line chestnut borer, we used to try and spray the bark 3 times with Dursban, 20 plus years ago, which isn't on the market anymore. And you're trying to wet down all the bark to kill the insects as they penetrate through the bark. Not only was that messy, it leads to big problems on most properties. You can't control the spray drift. And so by moving to soil applied materials, we were able to avoid having those concerns. The soil applieds can be applied when it's windy or raining out, all those kinds of things. And so we began to focus more and more on spraying smaller trees. So for us, 50% of our total sprays are done on just apple scab. And you really don't need really high-tech equipment to spray crabapple trees, that are 15, 20 feet tall, usually at the most. So it's a very effective way to get into spraying stuff. Don't try to spray everything out there in the marketplace. Focus on spraying some of the smaller kinds of plant materials on properties where you can make a big impact, but not have to invest a lot to get started. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up then. I don't have any other questions coming up on the computer. So if you do come up with something, you think of it later. Again, my email is available on there. Be happy to respond